Hello, hello. Thank you so much to everybody who listened to the first episode of my podcast, and especially people who were kind enough to leave comments. I really appreciate everybody who took the time to comment, because it's always a little bit scary putting something new out into the world, so it's really nice to hear that it's been well received. And it's nice to hear that people have just listened to it, to be honest. So yeah, thank you so much to everybody who took the time to comment. This episode comes to you live from a walk down the River Ness. So I've been to the Eden Court Christmas market today with my pal Sophie. Hello Sophie, if you're listening. And I'm just walking back through the islands, which is quite a pretty part of Inverness, where you've got multiple islands spanning the River Ness, and there's like bridges that go sort of from one side to the other, but sort of stopping at the islands on the way. It's quite yieldy-woldy looking. There's like street lamps that are sort of straight out of the Chronicles of Narnia, and because everything in Inverness is covered in lichen, the street lamps are also covered in lichen, and it definitely adds to the magical atmosphere, I would say. But I really like walking down by the river, because obviously you get the noise of the water, and that's partly why I thought it'd be nice to record this here, because I'm hoping you can hear a little bit of the background noise of the water. I'm also hoping that it's not too overwhelmingly loud, because I don't have a microphone attached to my phone right now, so I'm just walking along with it in front of my face. So I'm really hoping that you're getting sort of gentle background noise and not overpowering water crashing, that you're actually struggling to hear what I'm saying. I guess we'll work out these kinks to podcasting as we go. But in this episode, I wanted to talk about my works in progress, because this has always felt like sort of too bitty to put on the blog, especially for works in progress that have been works in progress for quite a long time. If I updated the blog every time about them, it would be basically I've knit another 2 rows on this shawl or whatever. It doesn't make for particularly riveting blog content, but I feel like that sort of content in the spoken word feels a bit more relatable, a bit more interesting. I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I enjoy hearing about works in progress from other people's vlogs and podcasts and things, so I kind of figured presumably you all might too. So yeah, currently I don't have many sewing works in progress, because my sewing machines got packed away when we moved house, and they got unpacked as far as they got parked in the room that they're going to eventually live in, but nothing for my craft room, because I'm very lucky in my new house to have a room that is going to be solely dedicated to my crafts. It is technically going to be a spare bedroom for guests, but we have a dedicated guest bedroom as well, so it's going to be like the spare guest bedroom, if that makes sense. So if like my parents and my brother and his wife come at the same time, then we can put everybody up. But for the most part, the bed part I'm planning on styling as a sort of analog nook. I heard that term on is it Louise Tilbrook's Substack, which I'll make sure to link in the associated blog post, and the idea is that you sort of set up an area in your house that's completely analog, so no phones, no chargers, no screens of any kind, and the idea is that it helps you to kind of switch off from the digital world, and I love that idea, because I'm a big fan of reading in general, but books specifically, but it can be sometimes hard to read books. I make time for reading, but also B, not feel like just constantly distracted. Basically, I'm definitely the kind of person that has the sort of brain that is constantly distracted, and I have to kind of think quite I have to concentrate quite hard to not get distracted, which means, especially with things like your phone on hand, it's just too easy to like settle down with the book and a cup of tea and get 2 paragraphs in and then be like, oh, you know what, I'm just going to quickly check my Amazon notifications, and then you check that, and then you realise that you've got a WhatsApp message, so you check your WhatsApp, and then you remember that you forgot to text your mum a link for something that your husband wants for Christmas, so you go off and do that, and then suddenly 20 minutes has gone and you've read like 2 paragraphs of your book and nothing else, you know. So I love the idea of setting up like an analog area, like a reading nook, and my plan is to sort of style the bed that's going to be the sort of spare guest bed. I want to style it as a sort of reading area, like cozy nook, and kind of use that as a way to escape the digital world for a little bit. But anyway, back to the works in progress. So yeah, I parked all my sewing stuff in the craft room, and then never actually got around to unpacking anything because I don't have enough furniture to set up a craft area yet. And then because the house needs renovated, renovation projects have sort of taken over a little bit. But before I packed everything away, I had 2 bestie bags on the go for 2 friends from my previous job, which was supposed to be sort of thank you so much for supporting me in this role. But I left that job back in June and it is now November. Luckily, I'm still in touch with them, so I'm sure I can send it with a card being like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry that this is 6 months late. But the point that I left them, I had done the lining and the pockets and the zip. And I was just starting to put the outer part together. I'll link all the patterns that I mention in the blog post, but the bestie bag is from Blackbird Fabrics. And I would genuinely recommend that pattern. I've made it so many times now. It's one of my go-to bags for my personal day-to-day use. But I've made one for my bestie, one for my mum, and then I've got these 2 for friends from my old job. The nice thing about making something like a bestie bag as a gift is you don't have to worry about measuring up someone or worry about it fitting. Obviously it's a bit of a one size fits all. Like the bag comes in 2 sizes, so you just have to pick between the smaller or the larger. But otherwise it's a pretty good pattern from a sort of gift giving point of view. But yeah, they are packed away somewhere in a box, so I'll need to get them out at some point. We've got our dining room set up now with a dining room table, so I could, if the motivation took me, I could definitely do some sewing. But at the moment I'm concentrating on wallpaper stripping, so but I will say this is the joy of having multiple hobbies, and knitting is just so versatile, isn't it? Because you can take it with you, it's portable in a way that, hand sewing's portable obviously, but machine sewing isn't. But yeah, knitting is great from the point of view of not needing to have like machinery set up or not needing to have a huge amount of space for it. And so I've just been doing a lot of knitting recently in the last few months, and specifically the last month since we moved house. So I'm currently working on the Heirloom Quilt Cardigan by Catherine Seeberger, I think that's how you say that. And I made one for me, which I have discussed ad nauseum on the blog, so I'm sure you're all fed up of reading about that one. But I'm now making one for my mum out of some thrifted tapestry yarn that came to me as a gift from a family friend when the friend's aunt died and she was clearing her aunt's house, and she found this huge amount of tapestry yarn, so she gave me a whole box of it, and I sorted through it and took out the bits that I wanted, and it was only a very small amount that was either donated to charity or literally binned because it was just unusable. The vast majority of it was usable, so I sorted it out into sort of the autumnal colour palette that I particularly like, and I used that to make my Heirloom Quilt Cardi, and then the pastel colours that my mum prefers, and that's the one that I'm making at the moment. And I'm holding the body double, so the tapestry yarn to make the... I should say before I start 5 sentences, in case you can't picture what I'm looking at, the pattern is made up of little squares, and each has an 8-pointed star, like colourwork design. And you knit your individual squares, and then you seam them all together to create a sort of boxy cardigan with 2 front panels for the sort of the fronts, the right and the left front of the cardigan, and then you pick up stitches and knit to form the arms, and you do ribbing around the neckline and the bottom hem. So what I did with mine was I did the colourwork part in the tapestry yarn, held double with drops kid silk mohair, which I buy from Knitted Home. I've bought from Knitted Home for years now, and I really like her business. And then I find holding it double with mohair just helps give it a bit more of a cohesive sort of colour palette. And then I used the green tapestry yarn for the sleeves and the ribbing. So the sleeves and the ribbing have a sort of subtle striped appearance. Although again, I held it double with the mohair, so that just helps with the sort of colour consistency. And I'm basically doing the same with my mum's one, except instead of the mohair, I'm using some thrifted Nutiden yarn, which is that fancy, I want to say Swedish, Scandinavian, I think, yarn that's unspun, so it's quite fragile, and it's always best held double with something else. Otherwise it just tears constantly and it's a bit of a pain. So I'm holding it double with the tapestry yarn to make the stars. And then I've got to the point where I've seamed together all my stars and I've pressed everything so everything's like blocked. And I've now picked up and I'm knitting the stitches for one of the sleeves. But I've run out of yarn in Mum's preferred colours, so I bought some more yarn from Knitted Home. It's so ironic, isn't it, that you want to use thrifted or second-hand materials, but then you have to buy other materials to make the thrifted or second-hand materials workable. But that's fine. So I bought some other yarn from Knitted Home, which is the Drops Alpaca, which is the first time I've knit with that one actually, and it is lovely. It's really soft, 100% alpaca, and I'm holding that double with the Nutiden, the charity shop Nutiden, for the sleeves and the ribbed sort of neckline and the bottom hem. And I think that's going to work really well because the Nutiden, because it was thrifted, I can't just go back to the shop and buy more. But my plan initially had been to hold the Nutiden double for the sleeves and the neckline and the hem. And then when I actually got to that point, I was like, I just don't think I have enough. And the risk is I'm going to run out halfway through. And then you can't really rip back Nutiden because it's unspun. So it would all just, it's too sort of, sorry, I keep saying I'm very aware of that today. It's too fragile, it's too friable. So if you tried to rip it back, it would just shred. So I thought better to spend a bit of money on the alpaca and then hold the alpaca double with the Nutiden, and that's where we're at the moment. And I'm not going to lie, it looks a bit weird at the moment. I've sort of got far enough into this project now where I feel like I've sunk so much time into it that I don't want to rip it back, but I'm not 100% sure how wearable it's going to be. So I sized up for Mum's. I made the size 1 for me. There's only 3 sizes. And it came out slightly more fitted and cropped than I was expecting. It's still definitely wearable and I still wear mine a lot. But for Mum's I sized up. I did the size 2. But obviously because there's only 3 sizes, there's quite a big difference in measurements between the different sizes. So I'm a bit worried that the size 2 is going to be too wide for Mum. And she might find it to be unwearable. So yeah, I'm not sure, but I kind of feel like I've got so far into it now, I'm just going to plough on and finish it. Worst case scenario, maybe Mum can use it as like a house cardie or something. She's the kind of person who feels the cold quite acutely. So, you know, she's never going to not find use for a warm cardie. But it would just be a shame, you know, when you put so much time and energy into making something for someone. And I love knitting for my mum because she is very appreciative of handmade items. So I don't make things for other people very often anymore because not everyone is that appreciative. And you don't necessarily know everyone's taste in enough detail, whereas I feel like I know pretty well what my mum likes, you know. So I'm about 2/3 the way down the first sleeve. I'm going to do both the sleeves and then I'm going to try it on myself, and then hopefully that will give me a good idea of whether or not it's going to be a winner or not. So I will definitely report back. And then the second thing that I've got on the go at the moment, which I've had on the go for months now and I just need to crack on with, is the Sophie shawl by Petite Knit. And I'm knitting that 2 yarns held double again. So it was some vintage Japanese silk yarn that my friend Moira gave me that she brought back from Japan in like the 80s. It's beautiful yarn, but it's not quite a colour. I thought initially it was quite a burgundy red colour, which is definitely in my colour palette, but I started knitting it up by itself, like just the silk yarn, and it was coming out more of like a dusky pink, like a dark pink, which isn't really a colour I wear very much at all. And again, I was like, oh, I've got far enough into this where I got to this point basically where I was like, I either need to just commit and complete this project or I need to frog it. And I just thought this yarn is too beautiful and too unique as well to plough on and end up with an item of clothing that I just never wear. So I frogged it, sat on it for a while, and then thought, you know what, because the amount of yarn that I've got, it's not really enough to make, say, a sweater or something that would be a bit more practical for my current lifestyle. But something like a shawl, I definitely would have enough for that. And I've never been a shawl, quote-unquote, person. I know there's a lot of people in the knitting community who are extremely pro-shawl, and I definitely see some really beautiful shawls out there on Instagram and whatnot, but I just personally wouldn't wear a shawl, I don't think, in like frequently enough. But then I was sort of browsing the shawl/scarf patterns on Ravelry, and I came across the Sophie shawl by Petite Knit, and I made quite a few Petite Knit patterns now, and I really like her style. I like that sort of minimalist Scandi type style. And the Sophie shawl, I've already made the Sophie Scarf, and when I made the Sophie Scarf I thought this is an amazing pattern and I will definitely make more of these in the future. But the Sophie Scarf is quite slim, it's quite narrow, so it's definitely the kind of scarf you would wear in like the spring transitioning into the summer or the summer transitioning into the autumn. Oh, sorry, hiccups. But now we're in full-on winter mode. It's not really a full-on winter mode type scarf. So I was looking at the shawl, and the shawl is basically the same. Oh, sorry, hang on. I'm just going to pause quickly to take a photo for the associated blog post. One sec. Love it. Got it. So you can see a bit of where I've been walking. The shawl is exactly the same as the scarf, but wider basically. So the scarf starts off quite a narrow tip, and then you increase on alternate sides with an I-cord edge up to a sort of widest point, and then you decrease down to a narrow tip at the other end. And it makes the Sophie scarf makes a sort of, I like to think of it as sort of my Monty Don scarf, like almost like a little, like almost like a neckerchief, but in wool. And the Sophie shawl is basically the exact same idea, but with more increases, so you end up with a wider, longer, essentially a shawl, I guess, because the widest point you could wrap it around your shoulders. But I've seen quite a few stylish people on Instagram who've styled it, just kind of more like a scarf, really. I think in my mind, when you say shawl in the knitting world, I'm picturing, and no shade on these designers at all, because they're incredible designers, but just not my style. I'm picturing more like a Stephen West style, like lots of sort of very bright contrasting colours, or like wacky designs in terms of like lots of lace or cables or combos of lace and cables, different stitches, so you get different textures, and they look really cool, but I just know in my heart that's not the kind of thing that I would ever personally wear myself. So it had never really occurred to me that you could just get plain shawls, or that you could take a plain shawl and wear it more like a scarf. So that is essentially what the Sophie shawl is. And sorry, just walking past someone there. So I've taken the Japanese silk and I'm holding it double with my T&T yarn, my Drops Kid Silk mohair from Knitted Home, in a similar kind of burgundy colourway. I actually really love the resultant fabric. It's really soft, really drapey. It's really nice to be able to let the Japanese yarn sort of shine in a way, because it's kind of pure and unadulterated, because it's not, there's no like fancy textures or sorry, slightly distracted there, I get mown down by a bunch of kids on bikes. Textures or stitches that sort of maybe detract from the yarn a bit. I did hesitate about holding the yarn double with the mohair, because I thought, does that sort of take away from how beautiful the silk yarn is by itself? But if I'm honest, and I found this before with plant-based, silk isn't plant-based, is it? But more like kind of cotton fibres, is they can be quite squeaky to work with. Like as you're knitting, they feel quite squeaky. I just don't really like that feeling, if I'm honest, while I'm knitting. So I just kind of got to the point where I was like, you know what, I'd rather this yarn was used than just like sitting in my stash. Sorry for the awkward break there. I was saying I'd rather this yarn was used than sitting in my stash. And then at that particular point on my walk, I turned onto a public road, and it's one of those roads where I was about to say it's a busy road. It's not really that busy a road, but of course, because I was recording into my phone, the universe sent like 5 cars, a giant articulated lorry. Like, there was so much background noise that when I listened to that section back again, I was like, nobody is going to be able to hear this. So I thought, you know what, I will re-record it when I get home. So I am now sitting in my bird watching station. Of course, there are no birds, and now that I've started talking into my phone, Badger's decided to walk around randomly crying in the background. So please excuse him. He's just excited because he thinks I'm on the phone. But what I was saying about the Sophie scarf was, ultimately I decided I wanted this Japanese silk to be used and enjoyed. That's ultimately what it's for, right? Yarn. I mean, obviously it depends on the person. Your mileage may vary, but, you know, for me personally, I don't really buy yarn just to stash it. I want to use it. I want to enjoy it. I want to wear it or gift it. I definitely get some joy from having a little bit of yarn in stash because it's nice to look at and squeeze it and think about the projects that you might make with it. And to a certain extent, having, for me at least, a relatively small stash helps kind of trigger my creativity. Like, sometimes I'll be idly looking at my stash and I'll suddenly think, oh, I bet that yarn would make a really good whatever project, you know. And obviously if it wasn't just sitting there staring at me, I might not have made that connection. So I definitely see the benefit in having a stash. For me personally, I don't really buy yarn or fabric with the intent to stash it. It does obviously happen because, you know, plans change and yarn or fabric that you bought for a craft project suddenly doesn't seem relevant anymore, or your situation changes, or you just don't get round to it. And then, I don't know, 3 years goes by, because what is time? And you realise that something that you bought ages ago has just been sitting on your shelf. Like, don't get me wrong, that happens to all of us, right? And for me personally, I have a much bigger sewing stash. I have a lot more stashed fabric than I do yarn. That would definitely be a good topic for a future podcast. But yeah, the point I was making about the Sophie shawl was, I think for a while I was quite up in my head about this yarn because it was this super special, or is this super special, like vintage Japanese silk, and it was given to me by my friend Moira, who brought it back from Japan in the 80s. So I just really wanted to do it service, and I was just a bit worried that by holding it double with the mohair, I just wasn't doing it justice. But actually, ultimately, the resulting fabric is really beautiful. It's a lovely colour. It's very soft. It's very drapey. I'm excited to wear it. I have yet to finish it, despite it being probably like at least 2/3 done, and have been sitting in my stash for weeks/months now. But the Heirloom Quilt Cardigan's been taking priority because that's a Christmas present, so I do need to crack on with that. And then I was going to talk about my third work in progress, but I'm very aware that this podcast is already getting fairly lengthy. So I might save that one because it's a bit of an experiment that's currently not going particularly well. Sorry, hiccups. So I don't know whether that's kind of going to be even worth talking about ultimately. So I might put a pin in that and come back to it. But it's a colourwork glove made with scrap yarn that has come out too big. Unsurprisingly, because I didn't swatch and I didn't follow the pattern recommendation for yarn. So there's a lesson to be learned somewhere there, but clearly I'm not going to learn it because I make the same mistakes over and over. But for now, I think I'll leave that here. Yeah, sorry again for the sort of sound break quality in the middle. I'll definitely get better at this over time. Mental note, do not walk along busy public roads whilst recording. But in the meantime, I hope all of your knitting and sewing craft plans are bringing you joy, and I will speak to you next week. All right, bye.